statue here, flat Earth, like Jesus. Just lately again, going around the various places I visit. A Facebook group called Comically Enlightened, of all things, came to my awareness there, and I thought I'd start spreading a bit of flat Earth truth on that. Better make the screen a bit brighter. Now, as you know, I'm not any expert in making videos or anything, but one particular person requested that I have a look at quite a few links he sent me, and of course most of these things have been debunked multiple times before. This one in particular is by a certain character who calls himself Holy Kool-Aid. What a fantastic name that one is. I don't know enough about this particular character to enter into it too much, but he's gathered together a team, as he calls it. I wrote this down. I started making a few notes, actually, because it was quite hilarious. He talks rather fast, so you have to be on the ball to keep up with him. What's he got? Several other pro-science, skeptically minded content creators. So, first of all, a further is a scientist. I think you need to get that into your heads. We're investigating everything. We don't just believe stuff as a religious belief, which is pretty much what you pro-science, skeptically minded content creators tend to be. You're not skeptically minded at all. If you were, you'd be a flat earther. You're just going along because you believe in the globe, and you somehow think that people who have come to an understanding that the earth is flat, that we're somehow mentally challenged and that there's something wrong with us because we don't believe your religious belief. So he's compiled 20 questions flat earthers cannot answer, and I thought I'd address them. So I'm just going to start in my amateur way of, no, that's really not going to work with that light, is it? I'll try and move that over here a bit. Is that going to work? Well, I can think we can see enough. Volume on this.
As a child, I attended a show where a magician sawed a woman in half. Not knowing how this mechanism worked, I leapt to the conclusion that it had to be some kind of spiritual, mystical force of magic. It was a false conclusion that intuitively seemed correct, but brought with it a host of other problems, assumptions, and unanswered questions. If you lack scientific literacy, it's easy to postulate far-fetched alternative explanations for how the universe works. They seem intuitive, but as with the magician, they bring with them a host of other problems, contradictions, assumptions, and unanswered questions. Maybe you've seen a flat earth conspiracy video or read a compelling anti-science blog post, but before you dive headfirst into that flat world of absurdism, with the help of several other pro-science, skeptically minded content creators, I've put together a list of questions for you to think about. When you're done watching this, I highly recommend that you go check out and subscribe to their channels as well. You won't be disappointed.
My question is this, to those who expect to see some kind of curvature on a globular Earth with their eyes, what exact kind of curvature are you expecting to see? If you're talking about the kind of curvature that goes away from us and over the horizon, then that would be indiscernible. It would look the same as a flat Earth because you can't see things that are under the horizon. If you're talking about a kind of curvature where if you were to follow the horizon from left to right, you would see some kind of curvature downwards, just follow that to its logical conclusion. Do a 360 spin on the spot. Where does that horizon end up? It wouldn't match up to where you started, so that makes no sense whatsoever either. Even if you were high enough up to see some kind of curvature, all it would be is looking down and seeing the entire Earth beneath you, and any globe from one particular point of view, because of perspective, is indistinguishable from a flat disk. In other words, nobody has ever claimed that the kind of curvature you're expecting to see is what you would expect to see on a globular Earth. Or even...
Now hold on a second. What a bunch of assumptions this character has jumped to, this cartoon kid. First of all, the curvature we would expect to see is exactly what you'd expect to see on any other spherical object that has a known measurable size. So when you say it's a 25,000 mile circumference, that means that there is 8 inches approximately of curvature per mile over a certain distance. Now that is per mile squared. So when we're talking about a distance of 90 miles, we're talking about the first entire mile of drop. Now let's put that into some sort of perspective, shall we? The Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, is barely half a mile high. So you're talking 2 Burj Khalifas over a distance of 90 miles. Now, there's many examples of people taking photos from one island to another of 90 miles or more further away. World record photos of almost 300 miles. Now, do you know how much drop should exist between one place and another if the Earth were a ball? This is not our assumption. This is mathematical proof. So don't come telling us what we should expect to see on your fantasy ball, when in reality, we don't see any of these things because it doesn't exist. Water does not bend around to conform to the outer shape of a ball. It is really that simple. So no, we don't expect to see curvature because we know there is none. Funny little cartoon
That
there.
is possible. Although I will say that it's a downside more possible than a flat Earth.
If you honestly want to believe that the Earth is flat, I'm not going to stop you, but I would...
Well, let's just stop you right there. It's got absolutely nothing to do with what we want to believe, you know? Did I want the world to be flat? I was quite happy with the globe world before I started looking into it and investigating it. Shit. Ah, that deserves a swig of homebrewed tonic ale. Want and desire have nothing to do with flat Earth. Did I want to be a flat earther? No. But as a seeker of truth, an inquirer of all knowledge, it's what you logically come to if you take your blinkers off and you investigate it. Carry on.
I'd like to ask, if you want to convince any of us,
They're
especially
all
those of
cartoon
us that
characters.
are at least moderately science-minded, could you please provide a working model, a full-scale working model of the flat Earth with accurate...
A full-scale working model of the flat Earth. You have got to be kidding me. Reality is the working model at full scale. What do you want us to reproduce all of creation just for you to satisfy your curiosity? The real model at real scale is how it all works, and it cannot work any other way. Real distance, real size, real perspective works in real time for real people who aren't afraid to investigate the truth. Your spitting ball fantasy is all make-believe. It's all fantasy, hypothesis, theories of gravity, theory of... well, what else is there? Gravity. Gravity's your answer for everything. Everything sticks to your spinning ball, even the atmosphere, even though the most natural place the atmosphere would go to in a void of space is to the place of least resistance, which is the void. Nature abhors a vacuum, and it would go out of its way to fill it. So,
predictions and measurements that follow through on that scale. And no, I don't mean the UN map.
Why is it that all other astronomical bodies, like other planets, their orbiting moons, the sun,
Rachel
and the stars,
Oates.
why is it that they're all spherical and the laws of gravity apply to them, but the Earth is somehow the odd one out? What makes...
Okay, well, first of all, the same old go-to that we'll say for this one as well is you don't look at the lights in the ceiling to determine the shape of the floor. That's just common sense. Now, second of all, there's no definite proof that these outer space orbs are even terra firma whatsoever. The closest one we've got to even possibly suggest it is the moon, which, as I've often suggested, is there to mock us, to make us think that outer space is real. By who else but Satan, the great deceiver, the Lord of the Rings. That's what that whole planetary body of that one looks like with the ring around it. It's the great deception to make us think that outer space is some massive, big place teeming with planets when we see nothing but other lights, which I suggest are orbs. All of them are orbs of light. They're all spirit beings of some variety or another. Some of them wander around. Some of them are fixed in their familiar places, and their families are who surround them. That's why they're the constant constellations. So that's just my hypothesis. Now, of course, I don't have proof for that any more than you have proof. These things are terra firma, orbs, planets with moons, or any of that sort of nonsense. There's no proof for it. Your theory is just as valid as mine, if not even less valid, really, because, well, you know, I thought for myself, whereas you get taught this stuff by what? Ancient Greek philosophers. And you think that, well, back 2,000 years ago, they knew more than what modern man can today by applying some intelligence, critical thought, and having deep spiritual wisdom of everything around him. You know, I've seen plenty of pictures of orbs in photographs, especially from in the Philippines. They seem to come up quite a lot in images. Now, people will write these off as specks of dust. Sheer and utter nonsense. They look the same as stars. They all have that same familiar pattern to them. They're a white glowing orb with a concentrated white circle just before the outer edge and a dot, at least one dot in the center. Now, these things shimmer and change quite a bit, but that's your basic model of an orb at whatever scale it might be. So whether there's earthbound orbs, where they're on tiny little scale, or great big ones shining as great souls in the heavens. That's all we really know about it. Now, as I say, the moon, yes, I will grant you, that does appear to be a physical, round, spherical body, and it's suspended somehow due to some sort of electromagnetic repulsion, possibly with assistance of filled with helium and hydrogen. But that one body does not prove an entire physical universe. And now you also said the laws of gravity apply to them. Well, that's utter nonsense. You liar. You charlatan. How dare you come along and say to flat earthers that this is the truth, that they're all affected by gravity, when for a very fact you have to come up with some 75% greater force called dark force or dark energy to counteract gravity, to stop everything from colliding into a singularity. So please don't come lying with your silly little questions, thinking that you are somehow superior to somebody who has reached the stage of comprehending that we could actually be living on a stationary plane, the only physical one in the entire known universe. Thank you very much.
It's different.
If gravity comes from the Earth constantly accelerating upward, not just moving quickly, but actually constantly accelerating, where's this infinite source of energy that's propelling it? Why do time lapses of stars?
Now let's just address that silly nonsense once and for all. Nobody suggests the Earth is moving upwards. So don't bring false claims of things you don't even understand. The first thing you do if you want to debunk something is you find out what you're debunking first, and don't just start making a fool of yourself. Now, what was your name again? Drew. Let's just...
the bodies like other planets, their orbiting moons, the sun, other stars. Why is it that they're all spherical and the laws of gravity apply to them, but the Earth is somehow the odd one out? What makes it different?
Well, did I finish actually answering that? What makes Earth the odd one out? Absolutely nothing. It's the norm. We see everything work according to density and buoyancy, not attraction of mass. All things of different weight or mass fall through the medium of air at the same rate, plus or minus air resistance. Remove that resistance altogether and even a feather drops at the same rate as a bowling ball. So it's just the lack of support of a medium which allows a heavier object to drop through it. It is very straightforward. You don't need to complicate it, and people are constantly asking me, but why doesn't the pen fall up if the air is less dense above it? Hello, how stupid do you have to be to think that way? The pen is more dense than all of the air, so it will displace the less dense air regardless of above or below it. Below it just happens to be the place because its mass has weight and the air has no buoyant force. So until it finds a buoyant force, it will keep on dropping perpetually until something of a more buoyant force stops it. And that's why Earth is down. That's why things fall down, because they're more dense than the air. Like the people that ask these stupid questions. So this fella,
constantly accelerating
with
upward,
the dumbest question
quickly,
ever,
but actually
genetically
constantly
modified
accelerating.
skeptic.
Where is this infinite source of energy that's propelling it?
Yep.
Why do time lapses of stars rotate in different directions in the northern and southern hemispheres, fitting perfectly with the perspective we would expect for a rotating round Earth? If NASA's...
Oh, let's just stop right there before Godless Engineer comes along with his annoying voice. Now that guy, I didn't even grab his name, but star trails. Now I've talked about star trails quite a bit in the past, and my challenge to any globe believer is to get yourself a ball, hang it from a ceiling, attach a little camera to it, point it at a fixed point in the distance, and show how everything makes perfect circles around that fixed point. What you are looking at is a phenomenon of the stars. It has nothing to do with the Earth, even though it meets your expectations that star trails would do this if you were on a spinning ball in outer space, and all the constellations remain constant for thousands of years for reasons, because even though you're all going through space at trillions of billions of miles every year, all the other stars just want to adjust themselves perfectly just for this tiny little insignificant space rock to make us feel special that we have constant constellations as we go around our sun in worship of the Son of God, because it's all one big religious belief. Now, if you can do this thing with one camera, do it with two cameras and point one at the other celestial pole on your artificial spinning ball model, and show me exactly how a spinning ball makes perfect circles around two fixed points. It should be simple, because that's what you keep on claiming. You are so wrong, it's not funny. People would be doing this every day and shutting me down on that particular topic. But nobody's done it once. Not a single globehead has even come close to trying to do it once with one camera pointing at one celestial pole. Why is that? Because they realise when they apply a bit of logic thought to it that when you attach a camera to a spinning ball, it's going to make straight lines as it goes around and around and around. So yes, it might explain for you in your brief moment of glory how the sunset and sunrise and moonrise and moonset works, but not the stars. The stars debunk your own model. So stop using that one as evidence we live on a spinning ball. If the sun and moon go around us east to west daily, all the stars would be doing the same as well. Finished. Now, this numbnuts.
Part of a global conspiracy, the Earth's flat, and the moon landings never happened, then how come anybody with a high-powered laser can bounce light off of retroreflectors that the astronauts left on the moon?
If climate change melts the Antarctic...
Okay, well that's a really good question, isn't it? Since they were able to bounce lasers off the moon in the 40s, well before they ever went to the damn thing. So to say that astronauts left them there, that's great, coming to a heap of assumptions. Now let's also have a look at a few other things. Now, I've heard it said before, so I'm not going to use this as my argument, because it means I'd have to sit down and work out the math, and I could not be stuffed to do that when it's already been done, and trust that the person who did it knows what they're talking about. So you're talking about an Earth that's going 66,600 miles per hour around the sun, as it spins at 1,040 miles per hour, as the moon is traveling 2,080 miles per hour around the Earth, as they're all moving in conjunction around the sun going 514,000 miles per hour. This is the belief of the globe. How fast does this laser light have to be going in order to be able to measure it going 280,000 miles away and come back again exactly to the observer? I think you're talking about something that is just physically impossible. The accelerometer thing that they used for the Michelson-Morley experiment proved that there is no motion of the Earth anyway. So why even have all these fantastic beliefs, which pretty much debunk the fact that you'd be able to send a laser to the moon and have it come back again, if you actually still believe all these fantastic speeds, none of which have been detected? What sort of moron believes that is scientific? If it's undetected, undetectable, debunked over and over, insanity. That's what it is. Let's see what godless cranium.
Antarctic ice wall, will all the water fall off the edge, or will we be swarmed with White Walkers?
Why from the southern
What the
hemisphere
fuck
do
was
images
that?
of the moon appear upside down? And you can verify. If NASA's part of a global conspiracy, the Earth's flat, and the moon landings never happened, then how come anybody with a high-powered laser can bounce light off of retroreflectors that the astronauts
Well, you
left
can't,
on the
can you?
moon?
If climate change melts
Climate
the
change
Antarctic ice wall, will all the water fall off the edge,
fall off the
or
edge.
will we be swarmed with White Walkers?
Or we will be swarmed with light walkers. What a very intelligent question, you fucking moron. First of all, the Antarctic ice edge is not holding the oceans in on a space disk. That is the most stupid, insane, idiotic thing that you globetards keep on trying to think that's what we believe in our Earth model. You're still stuck in your heliocentric belief. If anything, we believe that the planar Earth at the bottom of the known universe is potentially infinite, with multiple continents beyond this Antarctic ice wall, which holds us prisoners within this realm that we call our Earth, which with our own local sun, our own local moon, potentially enclosed in a dome. We don't really know that for sure. There's a chance of it. It could be like a fishbowl. It could just have really high edges around Antarctica somewhere that holds us in, that we can't get through, but it's an unknown quantity. So even if your so-called fake climate change existed, which it doesn't, the sea levels have always been rising. The Earth is constantly the growing physical bodies of land mass, which require all the plants and trees and dead bodies and everything to keep getting recycled to keep making it grow. We are living on basically the ruins of a once magnificent ancient world. All our massive mountains, the crumbling remains of once giant trees. Some of them might even be the petrified remains of giants, for all we know. And there's quite a bit of evidence to show that. So no, climate change is not going to make all the water melt and run off into space and have us surrounded by light walkers, whatever the fuck that meant, you moron. Eric Murphy, let's see if you've got an intelligent question. Let's see if at least one of them does.
Southern hemisphere do images of the moon appear upside down? And you can verify the change if you drive north and south, traveling, taking pictures of the moon. You can see that change as you move to the other side of the Earth. How do flat earthers explain that?
That one's quite easy, mate. Very, very simple. It just proves that the moon is much nearer and more local than what you guys like to say it is. You can't measure that huge distance of scale. That's one of the things I've been trying to put across in some of the live debates I've been on, is that distance diminution makes further objects appear smaller. So that goes the same for distances. So people are trying to use simple trigonometry to measure a distance of a vast object. They're getting false assumptions and false readings because they're not taking the distance diminution into consideration. Which means, what you see at 10 centimetres, a bit like, don't have one handy, you hold a ruler out in front of you at arm's length. The first centimetre closest to you is going to appear much bigger than the last centimetre at the end of the ruler. And yet they're not taking this into consideration when measuring distance objects. So to suggest that the moon is 280,000 miles or whatever you like to believe it is sheer and utter ludicrousness. Ludicrousness. Is that a word? I'm not even going to go into the right word at the moment. The thing is, you can use, say, a powerful P900 or P1000 that the flat Earth camera of choice, as Red's rhetoric likes to keep telling us, and you can zoom in on the moon as though it is much nearer, just as much as you can, say, people have said they've done it on a known distance of a billboard in, say, 20 miles away. They can't zoom in on the letters of the billboard and clearly read it, but they can zoom right in on the moon and see the craters very, very clearly. But again, we don't know the actual size of the moon, so it could just have the appearance of being closer in this instance. But if it's still actually really big, like if that crater was actually a 50-mile crater when it looks 2 millimeters to us, well, we don't really know these things. But we can certainly see that it's much closer than we're told. Pardon me. So the simple answer to this one is the equator is basically the halfway point between your North Pole in the center. It's like a big dartboard, I guess. Each line of latitude gets further and further out until eventually the Antarctic ice ring is at least 60, possibly 70,000 miles round. The equator is about 25,000 miles round. Either side of the equator is what we call the hemispheres, for want of using the old-fashioned term for thinking we once lived on a globe, where all measurements start to go pear-shaped beyond the equator, or as they say, below, even though there's no up and down in space. They still use the term below the equator, funnily enough. So depending on what side of the equator you're on, viewing the moon, it's a bit like putting a picture of the moon or put a picture of the Mona Lisa up on your ceiling. Stand on one side of the room and look at it, and it's the right way up. Walk to the other side of the room and look back at it, and now she's upside down. Same with the moon. It's just inverted because of the way you're looking at it. And because it is still very high up, like even at 50 miles high, that is extremely high. Extremely high. You think about it, planes fly 5 or 6 miles tops, and again, I question whether they even fly that high. You know, they don't look to be going the speeds and heights that they really claim. Again, I think that they've far underestimated or overestimated these heights because, again, the atmospheric gases get less and less, and they're using instruments that are calibrated at sea level. So I'm suggesting everything is much nearer and closer and smaller than we're told. But even so, when it is up that high, we're only ever going to see the bottom half side of it from no matter where you look at it. Even when it appears low on the horizon, because of its distance from you, you are still only looking up at the bottom. One of the things most people simply can't grasp about perspective is even though things appear low because of distance, they are still just as high as they are when they're directly overhead. Hence the same thing with the sun. I'm sure somebody will ask that in these 20 questions as well. The 15 degrees of angular momentum of the sun, again, we go back to the Freemasonic symbol, the compass, and the set square. The set square on the flattened level, always on the level, is where the sun sets, but it appears to go upwards and downwards in the big pyramid line, and so to the observer staying stationary, it will appear to move 15 degrees per hour exactly as we observe. So it's only once you understand perspective, everything becomes easily understood. Other things talk about the nature of light. Well, that's a far more complex situation, which we won't go into right now, so I'm just going to answer more of these simplistic questions before I run out of time.
Do you know there are over 500 people from 38 countries who have been to space, and that there's 72 different government space agencies, 31 private spaceflight companies, and 24 private endeavors, all of which are building rovers, landers, and probes? Now, this represents tens, if not hundreds of thousands of employees. NASA alone has 17,000. And they're all building equipment to meticulous specification based on universally applicable scientific principles. And this equipment has to be able to travel at mind-numbing speeds. It has to be able to sustain radiation and fluctuations in temperature. On top of that, it has to remain airtight. Are all of them in on it? And if so, how many of them can keep a secret? And if not, how are those at the top managing to fool every single one of their employees? If the sun is rotating up...
Well, it's quite simple. It's called compartmentalization. Everybody believes they're doing the right thing for their particular little specialty. You remain airtight if you want to be underwater, don't you? Well, there's one little explanation for why they're airtight. These phenomenal speeds you talk about are ridiculous and impossible. A speeding bullet goes 1,700 miles per hour. The International Fake Station is said to be going 17,150 miles per hour. People cannot withstand speeds greater than a speeding bullet. Not 17 times faster or 10 times faster. It's just not possible. No space shuttle could ever get shot up into the air and catch up with that speed without crashing and burning in some, well, would it be a horrible fireball in space? Well, no, that's right, because they're not in space. They even say that the gravity effect of the ISS is 95% that of Earth, and it's just their free fall motion which allows them to float around like they're bobbling on a frickin' harness string in a studio. Well, isn't that a funny thing? So many times they've tripped themselves up. They've used false bloody imaging, green screen. There's plenty of debunking videos on that. I'm not going to go into those myself. Debunking NASA, I couldn't give a rat's ass. It debunks itself. It's been done millions of times by millions of people. And if you're still believing in their fairy tales and Hollywood productions, then again, I suggest you need to get your head read, because you don't know what the fuck you are talking about. You talk about all these, what was it, 72 different space companies throughout the world? Well, yeah, it just shows how highly profitable it is to fool the gullible masses into handing over their hard-earned tax dollars so that they can trick you with some really terrible CGI-created photos and whatnot to try and fool you into this dream of outer space. It's all a mind control hoax that has you believing in some foreseeable future where mankind is going to reach the stars and that we're going to be somehow saved by our own genius. It's all nonsense. It's all utter crap. The only way we're going to save ourselves is by returning back to tending the soil, by starting to mulch the land to stop it flowing into the oceans, to stop the oceans from rising, to start growing giant trees again, to start growing all our own food, to start feeding all the poor and make the sick well, not by sending frickin' monkeys out into space and telling us what great heroes we are and how we should all be sacrificing and having all these homeless people living on the streets while they waste billions and billions of dollars of human resources onto such fantastical nonsense. Shame on all of you. Shame.
Above the Earth in a circle, then how do you explain both solar and lunar eclipses? And if the sun dips below the Earth to cast a shadow on the moon, then how come the entire Earth is never submerged in darkness at the same time?
Another moron stuck in his heliocentric beliefs. What do you call himself? Should I go back and have a look?
The Earth in a circle.
Objectively damned optimistic. Solar eclipses, very simple. The moon passes in between us and the sun. Lunar eclipses are, to the best of my knowledge, a creation or a result of another celestial body which has often been captured in the sky. It looks like a second sun. It's known collectively as Rahu, even though the original name Rahu applied to something else altogether. It is now known as that since we adopted the name for it. It's like a second moon that is always so close to the sun we don't see it, just as we never see a new moon phase. The phases of the moon are caused obviously by the sun shining on the moon. That's why we get the full moon one night per month when it's directly opposite the sun from our vantage point. And so it appears to rise at sunset. We see it all night long, that particular one night of the month. Every day it rises 50 minutes later. And so then it's always visible at some time during the day. When it gets too close to the sun, we can't see it at all. But during the daytime, we do see the moon because the atmospheric gases are what is glowing, and it's the neon gases glowing to give us the blue sky in the presence of the sun. The moon itself is not sufficiently bright to shine through it from the unlit part of the moon, but the lit part is sufficiently bright to be able to be seen in the daytime. So during the new moon, the whole lit side is facing the sun, occasionally eclipsing it, but we can't see it at all because none of it is bright enough to shine through the illuminated noble gases. And that is why we don't see this third body at practically any time whatsoever, because it is too close to the sun and the lit side is always facing the sun, not us. Occasionally it can be seen as what appears to be like a second sun at sunset, but it's quite rare. And once in a while, during a full moon phase, that will pass between the sun and the moon, eclipsing the moon from the sun, not the Earth doing it whatsoever. And that is why the glow that comes from the Earth illuminates the moon in that blood red sort of colour, because our atmosphere absorbs all the blue light spectrum, but some of that red light spectrum escapes, and that's what gives us the lunar eclipse. So that's how they're explained. Nothing goes below the Earth, especially not the sun or the moon. So again, another mentally insane person from somebody who's done no research whatsoever and is attempting to set out to debunk something, and all they do is make another fool of themselves.
eclipses. And if the sun dips below the Earth to cast a shadow on
Moron.
the moon, then how come the entire Earth is never submerged in darkness and the sun?
Here's a question to fire back at you then, Sunshine. Sunshine, that's a good word for it, actually. If the Earth is such a tiny, insignificant little rock, and the sun is such a massive, big, blazing star, 93 million miles away, then why is it that the tiny little shadow created by the Earth creates night at all? Why is there even night? If we just create this tiny little shadow, shouldn't all of the universe be still lit by the sun, and all we see is this one tiny little dot of darkness at night time? You can't explain that one, really, can you? Because it's not how it works. Light works through the propagation of the atmosphere and causing the noble gases to glow. Hence why when the sun gets further distance and recedes after being obscured by your horizon, it's not sufficient to keep the atmosphere glowing locally. It fades into twilight, and eventually it's so far away that the atmosphere doesn't glow at all, and you can see the stars where they always were all along. We're not flying through space, and the sun is not going below us. So easily explained on a flat, stationary planar Earth.
Same time. Instead, it's daytime in New York when it's nighttime in New Delhi.
Yeah. You say that the live footage of astronauts is fake because you can't see stars. But have you ever taken a picture or video of the night sky only to realize that your camera's sensor just isn't sensitive enough to capture these dim balls of light without increasing exposure time? Did you ever notice that it's daytime? The freaking sun is out. Of course you can't see other stars. Additionally, if it is impossible for the Earth to be...
Yeah, that's what I basically just explained for you, mate. I mean, what would you say? It's out when it's in. Anyway, that wasn't even a question. And I thought Steve McRae would have been, would have fired off a slightly better one than that. Yeah, exposure on cameras is usually insufficient to capture tiny little dots of starlight. You've got to be a professional photographer, basically, to get good images of the stars. I've occasionally gotten some reasonably good ones of the Southern Cross and that here, but that's very difficult to do. In fact, I find twilight gets better pictures of stars than when it's really dark. Don't know why, but maybe it's just the way modern cameras on my phone work. I should have stuck with photography many years ago, but hey, it got too expensive for me back then, and it's still too expensive for me now to really get a really good camera and get right into it. But hey, plenty of people are doing it, and share the wealth, I say. I don't need to do everything everybody else is also doing.
Around because we don't feel it moving at the incredible speed it's moving.
Moderators.
What's preventing us from feeling the force of the constantly accelerating flat Earth as it moves upward?
Oh, the same question
again. And all of the other luminaries be having to move at the same rate so as to not either crash into the Earth or fly away forever. But
we've already had that
can't
question.
we observe that in any way?
Because we got ads. Because that's not what it does. There is no motion of the Earth. Why can't you ballers get that into your heads? That some flat Earth society put out some false information to say that the Earth is accelerating upwards at 9.8 meters per second to give the illusion of gravity. That's sheer and utter nonsense. Nobody believes that whatsoever. We know it's stationary. It's fixed. It's fixed on its pillars. It's not going anywhere. Everything finds its place according to density and buoyancy. If something is not sufficient to give it buoyancy, it drops through it. If it's too buoyant in that medium, it rises up through it. It is all very, very straightforward and simple if you don't overcomplicate it and try and ask stupid questions. Why doesn't it fall up? Insanity. Alright. Let's see if we can get through this ad here.
My God, that's impressive.
My God.
Why do the stars and constellations we see in the southern hemisphere differ from those we see in the northern hemisphere?
When someone defends
What?
the concept...
Someone's got nasal issues there. That one went a little bit too fast, but why are they different? Because location is very important. That what you see is local. That's what location means. Local. As you travel further, things come into view. They rise above the horizon. You can test this simple things in your city if you wish. Go and stand at the base of a tall building. You have to crane your neck to look up at the top floor. But if you walk a few blocks away, now all of a sudden that building is barely above eye level. Did the building shrink? Did you go over the curve? But if you walked over flat level blocks the entire way, then you will know that it's just distance that causes things to appear to get lower to the horizon, not anything to do with curvature. And hence the same thing will happen with stars. Local stars are visible locally. Travel to another place across the plane, you will see different stars. Wow, isn't that amazing? And since we know that Polaris is fixed above the North Pole and all the stars appear to be going in circles around it, it's only logical that the stars we see in the so-called southern hemisphere are also only viewable at night time, but they're also moving on this giant clockwork. So that's why places like Africa and South America will also see the Southern Cross at their night time, and then it returns back to us again in the south for our night time. It's all pretty straightforward. The southern celestial pole, I know that's a slightly more tricky one, but seeing the stars move in worlds doesn't mean the world is moving through the stars. So that was whoever that was.
I've often heard the
Shannon
argument being made that I trust my own eyes, but we know that our eyes can deceive us. If they couldn't, magicians and illusionists wouldn't have careers. In fact, everything that we do perceive visually comes into our eyes upside down, backwards, and full of holes. It's our brains that do the hard work of constructing that into what we would call vision. Why would you rely on something as fallible and subjective as visual perception and reject more precise and reliable forms of measurement to make your argument?
Because you've used measurement, you use visual detection for every single measurement for one thing. So yes, you do use your vision to detect reality. That is how it works. And yet, that very same argument then goes against your globe belief about the sun moving 15 degrees per hour. How can you trust that to be proof of the globe and debunk the flat earth when you've just said that visual evidence is unreliable? But, we here in reality understand that visual evidence is highly reliable, but you have to come up with logical explanations, not ones simply just to fit your preconceived biased agenda, which is that we're living on a globe. So you match everything to fit that idea. But if you do it the other way around and say, well, I have no longer got any reason to believe we're on a globe, why would we see the sun doing that? Well, maybe it's a matter of perspective and the way we view it from our fixed point. That makes far more sense without having to back engineer other unexplainable theories like clinging atmospheres in a vacuum, curving water, ships clinging upside down to it that would crush a person if that much weight force was applied to them. But apparently, we can withstand all this massive force and still jump off the earth, no problem. But we'll hold down hundreds and hundreds, thousands of tons of steel ships onto oceans with billions and billions of tons of water clinging upside down, because in the fantasy world there is no upside down, everything's right way up, and that is sheer and utter nonsense that does not comport with reality, with experiment, with anything we can actually do, see, prove, feel, and therefore know. So, sorry, Shannon.
The Soviet Union and the U.S. were enemies during the Cold War, and we both had space programs. If one side claims the Earth was round and they were wrong, why wouldn't the other expose that?
That the sun and moon
Well, that's a fair question, I suppose. And my question to that one is, well, how do you know? How many Russians did you go and interview? Back during the Cold War, did you see them all say, oh, yes, well, the Americans went to the moon? No, it's both their agendas to believe that they're capable of doing this, but they still have their space agenda. They still get to spend their billions on their warfare technology and so on. And why would you go and debunk a good thing when you're onto it? It's worth billions of dollars. I mean, hey, if I was on a scam like that, do you think I'd go and blow on my opposition who my government funds me to oppose? No, it makes no sense whatsoever. Let the governments think that you're playing out these big fantasy space war games and get all the funding you want and create a few big rockets that go boom every now and then and put everything backwards for a while and say, well, we have to go back to the drawing board now, but in another 20 years' time we will be sending men to Mars. Only Well, now apparently it's going to be women because bullshit. Okay, what's this fella?
Just getting further away, then why don't they all get tiny just before night, and why aren't they absolutely gigantic when they're right overhead?
Okay, that's as I explained already, because you're not understanding the fact that height is already far greater than the actual distance that you've seen them go in the overall effect. And because of this great height, as you see in the corner of any room, the ceiling pointing down, well, the higher the ceiling, the more steep it appears. So by the time it reaches that obscurity point just a few miles away from you, it hasn't gone sufficiently far enough away to shrink. If you get up really, really high in a plane and you keep zooming in on the sun, you will see it shrink to a dot. In fact, I've even seen many famous liars, I won't mention any names, will I? Wolfie, the dirty dog. He zoomed in on the sun himself and claimed that it had set when it quite clearly hadn't set because he was up at 42,000 feet. So he lies on his video, and then when I point that out to him, he blocks me. That's the sort of people we're dealing with when it comes to these dishonest globe believers who are so clinging hard to their little fantasy ball, their religious belief that they've been indoctrinated with since childhood. They cling so hard that they will resort to all manner of tactics, dishonesty, not even applying themselves to the real and actual model. They'll just believe whatever they want to believe. They won't investigate anything. They'll try and make out that we're the non-critical thinking, brainless fools. Anyway, that's how the sun sets without shrinking. It will shrink with sufficient height. The higher you go, the more level the path you see it going away from you. But because you're so low to the ground and it is so high, you will ordinarily see it appearing to go pretty well straight down or across at an angle, since it's always going around the equator every day. That's the path it takes. It doesn't go in bigger and smaller circles to create the seasons. It gets higher and lower. And that perspective makes it appear to move smaller circles when it's further from us and bigger circles when it's nearer to us. Atmospheric refraction takes care of a lot of the rest. That's why you get longer daylight hours in the south when the sun is nearer, longer daylight hours in the north when the sun is further. Direct sunlight creates the seasons.
Christians, including the Apollo 8 astronauts who read from the book of Genesis while orbiting the moon, and Buzz Aldrin, who took communion before setting foot on the moon. If the round Earth is a satanic conspiracy, why aren't these Christian astronauts exposing it?
Oh, well, that's $1 million question, that one, isn't it? Maybe Christianity is a satanic conspiracy. Now, I grew up with Christianity, and all I ever saw in all the churches was pictures of the Christ on nails being crucified as a reminder to us people what happens if you dare stand up against the evil satanic church, try to become self-empowered, try to overturn the bankers' tables, try to cause disruption. He was crucified as a terrorist and is put up there as a constant reminder. And they do these ceremonies where they pretend they're turning bread and wine into his flesh and blood and then get you to eat it as though eating his flesh and blood are going to give you everlasting life. I don't really see anything Christian about that whatsoever. Everlasting life comes from living food, which Jesus taught, from the living food of the Mother Earth. I'm not going to go into that right now, but it's quite clear. Why would none of them swear on the Bible during that documentary? I forget your name right now. Making a documentary, goes around asking astronauts to swear on the Bible that they went to the moon. None of them would do it. Some of them got violently angry. Some of them punched him in the face. Buzz Aldrin, was it, or whichever one it was? Now, that's hardly what I'd call good, loving Christian people. If you believe you did something and you weren't out to convince the whole world in a massive lie, you would gladly put your hand on the Bible and say, yes, I walked on the moon. Yes, we went to the moon. No, it is not a big hoax. But they won't do it. So I think that says all you need to know about their loving Christian cult.
If it's a satanic conspiracy, why is it that the discoveries about the true nature of our planet and its place in the cosmos made by Nicholas Copernicus, Galileo, Hubble and Newton were all by devoutly religious Christians?
Freemasons.
According to your motto,
Freemasons, often held against their will to come up with a model that they themselves didn't profess in. Yeah, I think you can do some more research on that, and don't just name drop and try and pull that one out of your ass, because nearly everybody was a devout Christian at a certain time, because that's how you kept your ass alive in a time when they were bloody... Next.
Is the moon a disk, an ethereal light, a projection, or a hologram? And in half of all flat Earth models, you have Australia all scrunched and wider than North America.
It's two
How
questions.
come flat Earthers can't seem to agree on one model?
Well, because we've only been looking into this for like 5 or 6 years right now, using the maps that we've been given for the last couple of centuries that have barely been altered in all that time. Now, as I explained a bit earlier about the maps themselves, they're just made in bigger and bigger circles around the magnetic centre, the North Pole. So that's what your lines of latitude are. And as they say, they go pear-shaped below the equator, because all of a sudden these latitude lines no longer match the reality, because the distances aren't so great on the outer continents, but they're still designed to fit to this preconceived globe model, and so therefore they have to get unnaturally stretched out to appear to work on the actual map. If we started a new map from scratch and stopped doing it in bigger and bigger circles around the North Pole, we might finally come up with a working model when it comes to that. As to the moon, your question is it a disk? Well, I've already explained the moon, so there's probably no point me repeating myself again about that. But no, I do believe it is a large spherical object, and that as it was made and rapidly cooled, that's where the bubbles formed and popped on the surface of a molten glass-like substance. That's why they're nearly all perfect circles, with no great big meteorites or anything sitting around most of them. That's a theory I've come up with, but yes, it is a real physical body, and yes, it reflects sunlight. Yes, it is semi-translucent, and that is why it glows like a lamp in the presence of sun lighting on it, and that is why the phases of the lit part of the moon are greater by about 10% than the phases of the unlit part of the moon as it's waning. So, because it sort of glows slightly through the lit part. So, there's your moon explained. It's quite simple. Because it's held up by some sort of electromagnetic repellent force. Again, I don't know exactly how it works, but it is connected with the salt water of the oceans. It pushes the tides down around in front of them as well as it moves around. Now, I don't know how many of you people spend years and years watching tides and watching the moon and being in tune with nature, as I have been doing all my life. But I can tell you for a fact that when you're watching the moon approaching from the east, when you're down the ocean, you'll notice that the tide is getting way higher before the approaching moon. It is not pulling the oceans around by force of attraction of mass. It's the most nonsensical concept to even begin to believe in, that water can be pulled, but it can be pushed. And that repellent force is what's causing the tides, one in front, one behind.
The best arguments I had heard against flat earthers came from astrophysicist Dan Batcheldor. In order for the flat earth theory to be correct, it would not only involve a conspiracy of world governments and the airline industry and every nation's space program and, the makers and operators of all the satellites, not only them, but it would also require a conspiracy within the flat earth movement itself. Because if you had one flat earther located in New York and another one located in Los Angeles, and you were to ask both of them about the current altitude of the sun, the flat earther in Los Angeles would essentially have to lie to the flat earther in New York for the numbers to match up. So even within the movement itself, the flat earth movement, it simply makes no sense.
No, that claim did simply make no sense. So first of all, you talked about conspiracies with all the flights, all the pilots, all the space agencies and everything. Well, as I've said, no, it doesn't have to be known by just about anybody. People get their training, they get told what they need to know, and they get on with their jobs. Now, when you do ask a pilot how much do you take the curvature of the Earth into account, they'll scratch their heads and say, well, no, it's done automatically. But the autopilot does it all for them, or they'll just come up with some other nonsense. They'll never claim to have gone over any curvature. They'll sometimes try and invent the illusion of curvature to try and explain their model by using a theodolite app, for example, and saying, well, this is the true level of the horizon. It's this much above, and that's what we'd expect. But that's not eye level. That's theodolite level. That's overcoming the limitations of the human eye and telling you what your level would be at that distance where you see the visible horizon, were you or were another plane at that same height at that distance. It's got nothing to do with eye level and the creation of the horizon caused by the viewer's eye. So they're not in on any conspiracy. They're just equally dumbfounded, as are most of the governments. Most of the governments are people just like you and me, went up through the education system. Some of them had more privilege than others. Many of them come from rich families and everything. But there's no reason for them to try and believe anything other than what they were taught in school as well, that we've all been taught for multiple generations. So nobody's in on anything. It's just a few people are waking up to it and started to question and say, hey, all this stuff we've been told by these religious people for the last 500 years isn't adding up at all. It turns out that maybe their cult is all about sun worship, and that sun worship isn't necessarily about getting down on your knees and praising Almighty Sun, Ra, or whatever that you might have in your head that it is. No, worship is just simply placing it at the center. That's the place of worship, the Son of God, surrounded by the 12 faithful apostles, the disciples, the constellations, the houses of the zodiac, the 12 hours on the clock, all these things divided into 12 with the master at the center. That's what it's all about. So when they were finally able to put the sun at the center, it made Earth and us insignificant. We become meaningless. And when we feel that way, we become mentally insignificant. We become easy to control. We become good, obedient little slaves. We go to our jobs every day. We pay our taxes. We allow great frauds to be committed. We allow our children to be raped, for people to be taken into slavery. All sorts of horrible people running this world, all because you are too weak and mind-controlled to wake up to the reality, come to your senses, and say this insanity has to stop. And it begins by stopping with you, with what you believe, with what you know to be the truth. If you know it to be the truth, then it can be questioned. The truth does not fear evaluation, does not fear investigation. If you just believe it because everybody knows, that's a religious cult belief. And you are suffering and you're causing the people of this world to suffer because of your ignorance, your insanity, and it's time it stopped. Flat Earth realization is sanity, and it is the solution to all the problems that will unite all of God's people together under one banner to come together and reclaim this earth. So help me God. Have a good day.